Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Insurance and Real Estate Committee's informational forum on the audit findings for Access Health Connecticut. I want to thank everyone for participating on a very hot Friday in the middle of summer. But we felt that this was important information for us as a committee to dive into and to share with the public. I'd like Access Health to do their presentation, and perhaps you could start with introductions of your team members here and then dive into your presentation.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Madam Chair. James Michelle, Access Health Connecticut.
Good morning, everyone. Holly Swick, Director of Finance, Access Health Connecticut.
Good morning, everyone. Susan Rich-By, Director of Legal and Governmental Affairs, Access Health Connecticut.
Good morning, Kathleen Tellerita, Government Affairs and Communications with Access Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, James Michelle. I thought what we would do this morning, we'll give a quick overview of the 6 items that were issues that were identified in the report, summary of each one of them, and also to give you a context of what they mean to us. I'm going to ask Susan Rich-By to my left to do that overview, but also I want to couch everything we say there. We take every issue that was mentioned in the report very seriously, and the breaches that were mentioned in the report, none of them were from external sources. So we had no breaches. There were no breach to our system by an external source. Most of them were letters, notices that went to the wrong addresses, but because of our own policies, we reported them as breaches. So none of our employees, none of our customers' information were compromised, as far as we know. But most of them were notices that were sent to the wrong address because during COVID, a lot of folks moved around and they didn't come in to update their notices. So when we started to send notices out, we're doing the unwinding of Medicaid, and some notices went to the wrong addresses, and the current resident would call us and make us aware of it. We would classify that as a breach, even though the information that was listed in the notice were minimal, just name, address, and a number from our system. So it's just kind of great high overview, but nonetheless, we take every infraction that may compromise the security of any of our customers, employees, very seriously. So that's why we report them accordingly and take all the necessary action to protect those customers. So I'm gonna turn over to Susan. She's gonna walk over all 6 items. Then after that, we'll open it up to questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. As James mentioned, we take all of these very seriously. And this audit was for FY 20 and 21. So in some cases, 4 years ago. And we've made any changes that needed to be made. In a lot of cases, it was really more updates to our own policies to reflect what we've been doing in practice, and ensuring that we have documentation maintained. So the first item was a lack of compliance with data protection and statutory breach reporting. As James mentioned, IT security is probably of our utmost importance to us. We require that our own employees do complete annual training on privacy and security. We require our vendors whose employees have access to system data complete that training as well. And as James mentioned, none of these are breaches to our system. There's been no hacking, nothing going on in our system. These are one-off, either, someone has not updated their address or a minor human error, and it's just one consumer, one household being impacted. And just to point out that all of our notices that go out, none of them contain any social security numbers or dates of birth. They have names and addresses. They may have other information, from the consumer's eligibility for a program in there. But as James pointed out, the only identification number is a system ID number, which is not anything that anyone would be of use to anyone. Nobody could do anything with it. There's no Medicaid numbers. There's no health insurance, member ID numbers we don't have those, and they're not in our system notices. We regularly work with our vendors, very specifically our call center vendor, about always improving processes and training on security. We have implemented in our most recent contract with them additional reporting requirements for breaches and also penalties. And we have noticed, they have worked hard with their staff to reduce any human error that may occur. And they only allow their more senior staff, their escalation team, to perform any kind of help with a consumer on a password reset or an account linking with a consumer account and their application to prevent any breaches and incidents happening. If something does happen, we notify the consumer right away. We give them credit monitoring and identity theft protection as required, and we offer that for 2 years. We also provide, in this letter, we provide information to them about actions they may take themselves with the 3 credit bureaus. Some people prefer to control their access to their information in that way, so we provide that information as well. The other part of this finding was about our reporting for it. We report all of these system breaches, not system breaches, these incidents to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as required under the ACA. We also report them to the Attorney General's office in Connecticut, and we regularly work with the Attorney General's office just on consumer privacy and security. And there was a period of time that we were unaware that we had to additionally report to the Comptroller's office and the Auditors of Public Account. So of the 51 noted in this audit report, there were only 3 that did not have that additional notification. Since then, all of the notification has been required to the numerous state and federal agencies. And just as James has mentioned, we have constant monitoring of our system and access to consumer information because we know how important this is, to the trust to everyone that we're working with. Another item had to do with controls over eligibility and coverage overrides. When you're dealing with various programs, we have enrollment in the ACA programs as well as Medicaid and CHIP, Magi Medicaid and CHIP, if you will, in our system. There are instances where a coverage date may need to be changed due to some issue the consumer has been having, a special enrollment period, what have you. And sometimes there are actual eligibility overrides that are needed. Only DSS workers are permitted to perform overrides for Medicaid and CHIP. Access Health and the call center are not permitted to touch those. Access Health would perform any eligibility override if it was for an ACA program that we manage, and the call center workers, the higher level workers, are only permitted to do the coverage overrides, which have to do with the effective dates. In all instances, the worker is required to document what they have done so that the record is there, that it was appropriate. And from the sample that the auditors looked at, there were 3 instances where there wasn't documentation in the CRM or the system. 2 of the 3 were actually overrides performed by DSS workers, not Access Health. And the 3rd one, actually, there was no override performed. Someone had hit the override button and it got included in the sample, but no override was performed. We made the auditors aware, but they left it in the report. Moving on, another item was some issues with purchasing processes. There were some irregularities noted for timing of signing purchase orders, documentation for certain purchases, and some credit card purchases during the audited period. Most of the findings for the credit card purchases are actually for the same very small number of credit card purchases. They represent 1 to 3% of total credit card purchases, and they were actually not violations of our policy. Our policy just wasn't clear distinguishing between what was required for travel purchases with a credit card versus non-travel purchases. We've looked at the accounting policy and procedure manual to make sure that it actually reflects what we have been doing, always been doing in practice. Another recommendation was on inadequate documentation on criminal background checks. Some of you may be aware, under the ACA, one of the avenues of consumer assistance is a navigator program. Access Health is required to have a navigator program to select navigator organizations and to make grants to these organizations to provide access. Usually they're organizations that work more directly in the community and they have a population that they serve, in addition to all of the other in-person assistance channels that Access Health makes available. Because we do take security so heavily, we require that the navigator organizations perform criminal background checks on all the employees that may work as navigators, just like we perform for all of our employees, and we require the call center and other vendors with access to consumer information to perform. There was one instance with one navigator organization and one person where the person had passed the background check and the organization was unable to locate the documentation. Since then, for FY 22, 23, and 24, we have checked with them. All the documentation is there. And for the new navigators that will start for FY 25 in July, the contracts with the navigators will require them to provide a written certification to us so that we ensure that the documentation is all there. Another item was for monitoring of overtime. We have some of our staff are hourly, and they primarily work in our customer resolution team. This team serves as second tier or third tier, if you will, consumer assistance when there are issues that the call center can't handle. More complicated issues, they come to our internal consumer resolution team. Our goal is to always address issues as quickly as possible so people are not out there, not having access to their coverage. So periodically we ask our workers in this department to work overtime so that we make sure that we don't have a backlog. We also, as I've been mentioning, provide a great deal of in-person assistance during open enrollment every year, and then during the past year every month. Because of the Medicaid unwind, we host enrollment fairs around the state. So there are locations for people to go to. One of the assistance channels at the enrollment fairs, we need enrollment specialists. So we also ask the people who work in this team, because they are so knowledgeable and so expert in our system, to work overtime sometimes at these fairs. We want to hold the fairs at times that consumers can come. We don't want to hold it at 10 o'clock on a weekday. They're usually in the evening or on a weekend when consumers can come. So our workers are asked to work overtime for those. They are always required and get pre-approval for their overtime. There were 12 hours of overtime during the audit period that we could not locate the documentation showing the pre-approval. We are making sure that all of the records of the pre-approval are always maintained. And just so you know, there is a secondary check in addition to the pre-approval before the person works the overtime. When the biweekly time cards are submitted, a employee's manager is always required to approve their hours, which would include any overtime they may have worked. So that is a secondary opportunity to catch if there was any irregularity, but there have not been any. And finally, the last finding was a lack of compliance with statutory reporting requirements. Like other quasi-public agencies, we are required to submit quarterly and annual reports pursuant to 1-123. There was just some timing issues of when these reports were submitted. There is no timing actually specified in the statute, but the auditors had their own opinion of when they should be submitted. The other part of this finding has to do with our investment policy and investment reports that are required under our investment policy. Access Health maintains reserves. These reserves are maintained in the State of Connecticut Treasurer's Short-Term Investment Fund, known as the STIF. We do not actively trade a portfolio. We don't want the risk. We put all the funds into the STIF. So at every quarterly finance committee meeting and board meeting, Access Health has always reported to both the committee and to the board on the balance in the reserves, any interest earned, and how many months of operating funds are available through the reserves, which are the criteria that are required in the investment report. We just were not characterizing it as an investment report pursuant to the investment policy. Since the auditors pointed that out, we have begun calling it an investment report, but the information has always been provided to the finance committee as well as to the board. I will
Madam Chair, those are the 6 issues that were identified in the auditor's report for FY20 and FY21. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you and the committee may have for us.
Thank you. We will open it up to questions from the committee, and then we can move to questions from the public. So I just want to go back to the last point on the reporting requirements. And just so everyone knows, we did have a discussion prior to this. And one of the things that the committee had asked is, like, does that statute need to be tightened up? If you're saying it's kind of vague when you're supposed to put the reporting in, you know, what recommendations do you have, or will you provide recommendations for us to make that more clear?
Yes, we will. We've discussed it among ourselves. Before doing next session, we will submit a modification to that bill to get some hard dates.
Yeah.
Again, filing these reports on a timely manner, we are dependent on other reports that we get from our auditors and so forth.
Right.
So we gotta make sure the timing works for everybody. So
Yeah, because one of the recommendations from the auditors did say that this is something that has come up in previous audit reports. So I think we need to, you know, there's obviously some misinformation or, you know, just could be tightened up, the language there.
I would just note that it is the 1-123, so it's not just dealing with Access Health. It is all the quasi-public agencies. So I don't want to speak for all of the quasi-public agencies, but I guess, you know, in an instance where a statute doesn't specify a time period and the auditors have an opinion, you know, there might be a better way to look at it.
Just on that note, we do have a great relationship with the other quasi, so that's something that we can talk with them about and see if there's a way that they would like us to update that. Is it going to just affect Access Health, or will it affect all of them? So we'll have that conversation with them as well over the next few months and get back to you before session.
Great. My next question is going to the vendors. What, you know, there was a lot of concern. I mean, you did a very high level kind of overview, but there was a lot kind of broken out in that section. There was, you know, several $1 million in consultants, which accounts for, if I did a quick back of the napkin math, it's almost half of your budget. And, you know, my question really is, what oversight has Access Health put into place? And more importantly, was the board aware of the lack of bids or approvals for these expenditures, and what's happening going forward to strengthen that sort of oversight? And again, this is, if you're reading through the report, they bulleted out, you know, several different line items. I think the goal here is to just, you know, what oversight is going into place, and, you know, how can we prevent that going forward, considering the size, you know, of that expense.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, on the credit card transactions, which is not part of that larger number, I believe, they literally, several of those findings, if you look, are just on the same like 5 or 6 actual transactions that the auditors, because the policy didn't distinguish between travel and non-travel. There is a requirement for non-travel on a credit card that you have a PO and a W-9. So they were trying to hold us to having POs and W-9s for travel, which we've never required. The policy just didn't distinguish between it. That's what we did in practice. It just wasn't clear. So they broke that out into multiple findings, but it was really just the same series of credit card transactions. On the larger ones where they were talking about the quotes, it actually was not a violation. Those were not violations of our policy. There are instances where the requester, you know, from Access Health that is requesting the purchase is not required to obtain additional quotes. Those are including but not limited to purchases under an executed contract following a competitive bid process where the exchange has already obtained pre-competitive bids, purchase off of a valid state contract. There are many instances where quasis and other agencies are permitted to purchase off of state, you know, contracts that the state executes. In those instances, the state has already done the competitive bid process. Certain IT security, infrastructure, or financial system constraints, purchases for professional development classes and conferences where you're not going to get quotes, multiple quotes. And there are also some instances where the requester cannot find suitable vendors to provide the additional quotes. Sometimes there's an instance, and I don't know if you've heard this from other quasis or agencies, you know, we are subject to a lot of the state contracting requirements. We sometimes come across instances where a vendor will not agree to the state terms that we are required to have on our contract. So it can become a challenge getting the bids because no one else is interested because of those requirements.
Thank you for that. I will note that this, the recommendations from the auditors on strengthening your purchasing, process was noted in previous audit reports. So again, if there's a way to do this better without getting flat, you know what I mean? Like the way you're explaining it and there might be some way to streamline the process. Again, with help from the legislature. Another question I have, has Access Health and the board engaged in a full review of all the activities, bids, and expenditures after the auditor's report to ensure there are no other issues, considering they're just identifying, a small population? Have you done an internal audit of everything to make sure that other things haven't fallen through the cracks?
I think Access Health, we're probably one of the most audited agencies in the state of Connecticut. Where, every year we go through at least 3, if not 4 audits. We have the federal audit, and we also have our regularly annual external auditors, and then we also have the state auditors, and we do go through our IT security audit, which we have to do every year, and we report to the CMS, and they're coming in to audit it as well. And they do an in-depth review of our processes and procedures with respect to how we procure IT services, but more importantly, our IT systems, looking at the controls we have in place, make sure that no one, we minimize the risk of somebody hacking into our system. But again, we get audited 3-4 times a year, every year. And the issues that the state auditors have come up with, while we take them very seriously, but we don't know that we know that they're not pervasive throughout the organization. Because we do our own internal reviews on a regular basis. And we have a lot of checks and controls between legal and finance before we procure anything. We have a very thorough procurement process that the board approved, and we review it on a regular basis, and that's checked on a regular basis to make sure that we are consistent with the board's procurement policies. So again, we'll talk with the finance committee to see whether or not that's warranted, but we don't think so, right? But we do get audited. I mean, we are currently going through another audit right now by the state auditors that just started for 22 and 23. And our regular audit we just got new auditors. They're going to start later this month, early next month to do the auditing. We just completed an audit for the federal government. And everything you are mentioning, and by the way, all these audits always come up clean. Everyone will come up clean. So your point, we will have a conversation with our finance and audit committee to see if they want to go through another audit to address your concern, your question.
Are your internal reviews and additional audits available to our committee to review?
The processes we go through in terms of our IT reviews, yes, it's all public information.
Okay.
Right, and also I'll talk about the smart audit. Yeah.
The smart audit, and also, excuse me, James was referring to the financial and programmatic audits that we're required to do pursuant to state and federal requirements. And those are always available. They're completed in November for the prior fiscal year, but those are always available to look at as well.
So we can certainly forward them to you, to the whole committee.
Perfect. Thank you.
And just to note, Representative, one of the prior findings on purchasing had to do with our board-approved purchasing policy, procurement policy, and they recommended that we make changes that we specify the 4 instances that a sole source was permitted, and we did make updates to that policy about 2 years ago.
I have a couple more questions and then we can pass it around. I wanted to, so when things like this hit the media, the feedback from constituents are, fraud really related, like, making sure that, people are properly going through the due diligence period by Access Health to sign up for the right plans and things like that. So I wanted to just have you walk through how you verify residency for new and existing members.
As I don't know if you know in your work, it's very hard to verify residency. If you look at the Department of Motor Vehicles, I think their process is to require when someone moves to Connecticut, a few pieces of mail from a prior official mail from a prior address and mail in Connecticut. And that is what we do when someone comes in with a special enrollment period during the year saying they've made a permanent move to Connecticut. That is what we require them to produce. There isn't a really up-to-date great data source on addresses. We do look at Melissa data is in our system to ensure that it's actually a real Connecticut address that is being used. We've also begun in the Department of Social Services because of this issue, if you will, with people not updating their applications and moving during the time period of the continuous coverage. We've incorporated the national change of address data in our system, but for qualified health plans, we can't just change someone's address based on what comes up in that database because address goes to county, which goes to premium rating. So that's an attestation from the consumer that the consumer has to make. We can't update. Medicaid does make that update based on NCOA data. So what Access Health has begun doing now that we have the data incorporated in the system, we send a letter to someone saying, hey, it looks like you've moved or this isn't your correct address, can you please make the update on it? It's just, address is a challenge. And as James mentioned, some of the population does move a lot. So that is a challenge to have a good data source to verify that someone lives in Connecticut, other than requiring printed mail if someone says permanent move to Connecticut.
I hear you that is a challenge. It also is very scary to me that just calling someone and saying, hey, do you live at this address? Like an oral attestation, verifying, someone that, can enroll in a plan, considering Connecticut has, a great Access Health plan. I just want to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of coming to Connecticut or saying they're coming to Connecticut or faking that they're in Connecticut and getting a subsidized plan when, as you're aware, we are dealing with, a very expensive commercial market and, an aging population, and all we are dealing with from our residents are, please help us, afford, healthcare or insurance coverage. So I think we need to work together on figuring that out a little better. I have actually heard from the industry some really scary stories on fraud that's taking place. So I think it's something that we need to do a better job at. I wanted to just also ask, that was a residency question, but how are we verifying, or how are you verifying income?
The system automatically pings the Federal Data Services Hub, and one of the data sources there is the IRS data. So it is checking what the person put in against IRS data. As a secondary source, I believe we also have quarterly wage data from the State Department of Labor. If there is an inconsistency above a threshold in what the consumer put in and what comes back from the data source, the consumer is given what's called a 90-day reasonable opportunity period. This is required under the ACA to submit documentation to verify that. So they can submit, pay stubs. If they're self-employed, they can submit various types of documentation to show their self-employed income. So if they submit the documents during the time period and they can verify, you know, then they will go forward. If they don't, then the subsidy would be removed.
Right. And this is just my last question, and I apologize for asking so many questions, but just to stay on that, you know, topic. So you ping the system, someone was saying they make, say, $50,000 a year. You find out that they're making 75. What is the process? Just walk us through that for putting them into a different plan. And what's like the timing for that? And again, the subsidies that, you know, do they owe money back? Just curious about that process.
So as I mentioned, they will get, if there is an inconsistency, they will be sent a notice right away that there is an inconsistency and that they have a 90-day period to verify it. Depending on whether they're eligible for a cost sharing reduction plan or if it's just the APTCs, the federal subsidy, it doesn't impact the plan that they're enrolled in. It impacts the, you know, federal premium subsidy that they're receiving. For someone who's got income below 250% of the federal poverty level, then it might be the actual plan because they're in a cost sharing. If they choose to enroll in a silver plan, they would be enrolled in one of 3 tiers of a cost sharing reduction plan. So if they do not provide the verification by the time that 90-day period runs, then their subsidy will be taken away. If they lose their eligibility for their tax credit, then they are also ineligible for the cost sharing reduction. So they would be notified that they are losing their eligibility for that plan and they need to come in. They can still have coverage with us, but they wouldn't have that financial assistance and they would need to pick a different plan. The cost sharing reduction plans, there isn't a payback required. The tax credits are an advance payment of a federal premium tax credit. So if you received payments that you were not eligible for when you filed your tax return at the end of the year, your eligibility is based on your actual income for the year, and the IRS would require the consumer to reconcile with the IRS.
Oh. And we have Representative Meskers. You have some questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess one, given the nature and the difficulty of the audits, we really do need, I'll echo the chair's suggestion. I think we need to know what legislation we can do to help ease the pain of the audits. And given the restrictions on purchasing, I'm a little bit concerned when you're out looking for vendors. I think it's important that we figure out if we need to modify some of the rules and without violating federal statutes to improve the number of providers so that we get, you know, more than 1 or 2 bids in the process, right? So those 2 things I think should help in the operation side in the audits. If you give us guidance on what parts of the audit are either helping or hurting or aren't really providing you useful information, because that's kind of what I'm hearing, right? Some of the claims or attacks or audit results, negative results, are a function of the fact that there was interpretation of the rules. So if you need clarity through statute, please come back to us on that. The question I have is, and I've asked this in the past, in relation both to the audit and to the performance, are we successfully marketing the programs? And do we need to open up to the industry the ability to market directly and enter data directly into the system? I'm concerned, given the federal benefits in the Affordable Care Act. I'm, you know, going back on an issue I've raised before, I'm concerned that we're not maximizing participation or that we've reached an impasse in getting new participation in the plan. And I'd like you to comment first on the auditing issues and then the second on the potential marketing, if you're prepared to.
I think you were referring to what I was talking about, that sometimes there are instances where it's challenging to get numerous bids because there are vendors that don't want to agree to the state contracting terms. Generally, it appears to be some of the CHRO terms and requirements that give them pause. We try to work with them and explain. CHRO is very helpful to try to work with them and explain, but sometimes there is a vendor that just doesn't want to deal with it. So,
And if we can work through the insurance commissioner and yourselves, if there needs to be modifications specifically related to Access Health, I want to know about that, right? Because not because I'm trying to weaken our auditing standards or the attestations of bidders or representations, but I'm concerned if we're narrowing the number of people who will bid to provide services, that we're going to get overcharged for the services.
Yes,
You know,
we're concerned about that as well. Obviously, we want a competitive process, but Ask Yourself is a very unique organization, and we do some we need some unique processes. And sometimes
well,
the
all I'm suggesting, I'm sorry, not to interrupt, but all I'm suggesting is a conversation with the insurance commissioner and a response back to us about how we can facilitate that without allowing either fraud or spurious bidders into the process. If you're only getting one bid, it doesn't comfort me that you're going to get a good price on the process or that people will game the system. So the real question is, is there a structural way that we can remove some impediments to improve the number of people who want to offer, who want to participate in those competitive bids?
I don't believe, in my understanding, that these are things within the purview of the insurance commissioner. The CHRO requirements are in place for state agencies and for quasis. I mean, we're not subject to all of the state contracting, but a number of them.
Right, but if you need, again, you talk with him and so that he's comfortable. I think the insurance commissioner is always good to help on that. And then we come back through either our committee or GEA or judiciary. I'm not sure who's gonna have to give us the benediction on that, but it's something that I think needs to be attacked if we're not maximizing the number of people who are coming in to bid. And if our structure is leaving us with one bidder, that's a dangerous process, right?
thank you. We'll look at that, and if there's any changes that we need to make it easier or make it more competitive, we'll come back to the committee with it.
Yeah, and I would go back to the vendors and ask specifically what their problems are, and ask, and then we need to review whether we can improve the process. That's all I'm suggesting. On the other process, I think I know you're marketing to a unique group of individuals in terms of the Access Healthcare, or a more difficult group to reach. I'm not sure if we need to broaden that the access, and whether the insurance companies and their normal stable of salespeople would be beneficial to get them directly licensed to enroll people on the system. And that's a question and request for you guys to consider.
We have thought about that in the past, and we've always ended that Access Health is in the best position to offer choices to Connecticut residents. Simply because it's more competitive. If we are the marketplace, when you open up to insurance companies, then they would marketing their own product, not multiple products. And like we have in the exchange, we have two insurance carriers in the exchange. And if you shop on the exchange, you are able to. We have tools where you're able to compare. We ask you some questions, and then based on how you answer the questions, and you will get the best options available to you based on your age, where you live, and also a type of medical services that you may need over the next 12 months. So we ask you about 3 to 5 questions. Based on that, it gives you the best option regardless of the carrier. So we think that because of that, the exchange is probably the best place for Connecticut residents to shop and compare and pick the best plans for themselves and their families. So that's always been our position. That's how it was set up. But I do want to comment that we had our best year this past year. We had almost 135,000 Connecticut residents, but purchase insurance through the exchange. About 134, 135 is what we had this past year. And also, for the very first time, we've crossed the $1 billion subsidy coming to Connecticut residents. So for the very first time since we started, we've had over $1 billion. We are projecting over $1 billion of federal money to come to Connecticut to support Connecticut residents to pay for health insurance.
Well, yeah, but the $1 billion is a function of the increased subsidies. The 135 represents an increase in the baseline of how many people on Access Health over the last year.
So the last year we had 106,000 when we ended. We had
Okay.
400 so it's about 20, almost 20% increase.
Okay, notwithstanding your comments, and it's not, I don't want you to take it as a personal criticism, but if we're going from 106 to 135, the subsidies have gone to $1 billion. I'm going to be looking to see what the insurable base looks like and the amount of people participating through the sales program you envision. And I accept your concern that some of the people might be steered towards a less beneficial product. And that's kind of what you're intimating. But I'm concerned if they're not going to any product, we're overall losing. So I think the issue that I'm going to be focused on laser fast is not the dollar amount of the subsidies and benefit, but the number of participants, and want to see what the growing rate of insurance is versus the number of uninsured versus the number of people in the market. Because my concern is that we don't have sufficient market penetration. And it's I know it's a difficult market, and maybe the insurance agents aren't the incredibly better suited to market it, but excluding them, I'm going to be asking this question probably until you guys roll your eyes and tell me to be quiet. I'll be asking the question about the number of incremental participants, because those subsidies, another 10 or 20,000 residents in the Access Health would recognize a material increase in the federal subsidies. And the spillover impact, is to take people off the uninsured docket, reduce hospital costs, at which point I'm going to go after the hospitals to reduce the premiums on the private insurance market. Because the more people who are uninsured, as you well know, the more it bears, there's not only an assessment coming from Access Health, but the guarantee of access to the emergency room without insurance is going to cost all of our private insurers and our private carriers, and me as a insured person, higher rates. So I want to let you know that that's a continuing concern for me. I'm happy to see you've gone from 105 to 135 or 110, if those are the numbers. But I expect, I want to see that growth as the number of uninsured, I'm assuming, is growing in the state, or the number of people eligible for the Affordable Care Act. I want to see that we make sure that we get our adequate federal subsidies. All right. Thank you.
Our goal since we were created is to lower the uninsured. That's our main objective. The second objective is to address health disparities in the state of Connecticut. But our primary objective is to lower the uninsured as low as possible, and that's what we do every day. And we are developing a new system over the next couple of years to make it easier for Connecticut residents to shop and compare. And right now, it's still the same system that we've been using for the last 12 years. And it's very complicated, time-consuming, not just for us, but across the entire country. So we are looking to make it easier and faster for Connecticut residents to shop, to purchase insurance to Access Health. So we think that's going to help. But our main objective since we were created is to lower the uninsured. And we have taken a big bite out of there, but there's more room for us to continue to drive down that particular number in the state of Connecticut.
So we'll agree very actively on that point, and that's where my concern is, that we continue that, and the amount of money we have to invest to market to 135,000 people probably pales in comparison to what Cigna and Aetna, CV, all of the major carriers. And so the question may be, is there a way to have a more productive partnership and to get them on board and make sure we're comfortable that there's no steering going on? But that's a conversation for another day. But I think we've had that conversation. I just wanted to raise the point again. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Barry?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think most of my questions have been answered, but I want to dig a little deeper in finding number 3 in regards to the credit card transactions. Was the policy for travel, non-travel officially changed?
Yes, it has been changed so that it's clear that the purchase order and the W-9 is only required for non-travel. It'd be virtually impossible to get a W-9. I'm going to call American Airlines for a plane ticket or, execute a purchase order. So it was never meant to be for the travel expenses. It was for non-travel, but we just weren't clear. So we have updated that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who has credit cards?
It's a very limited number of employees, just senior staff, exclusively just the members of the leadership teams. I have one. I don't think I may have used it twice last year. Again, the credit cards are used exclusively for travel, where everything's documented. Everything is documented, electronically transmitted. But we haven't done a lot of traveling for the last, because of COVID. We just started getting back out there, going to conferences to meet with our colleagues across the country in terms of sharing ideas and thoughts, best practices for in the exchange space. But it's not a heavily used. But that's why the transaction. How many transactions this impact? About 3 or 4 transactions.
It was a very small number, and what they did was they repeated findings for them. For instance, an expense report is required for travel, for using the credit card for travel. And they noted for the non-travel use of the credit card that there was no expense report. There's no expense report required for non-travel. And the W-9, and like I said, the PO is not required for travel. So it was literally like 5 or 6 transactions that they broke down into multiple findings, and they really just didn't apply. But we, knew we needed to make the policy clearer so that that was clear to the auditors and to everyone. Everyone, all of the employees knew that in practice, and that's what we were doing. It just wasn't distinguished in the policy, if you will.
Is there a procedure or to, if an employee leaves, to get that credit card back, to make sure that you get the
Yes.
credit card back?
Yeah, we have a very detailed process and controls for credit card usage. And when you leave, the credit card is canceled immediately.
Okay.
But and then again, there's an exit. We take not just credit card, but your ID, laptop. There's a checklist of
All the
items.
systems you may have access to.
Yeah, all systems, you cut off from everything once you leave. But again, not every employee, very few employees have a credit card.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And going into the 22-23 audit, you had 6 findings last year. It looks like 3 were repeated. Do you anticipate recommendation 1, 3, and 6 had been repeated from prior years? Do you anticipate all of those issues being resolved in the upcoming audit?
Yes, and like I mentioned on the reporting for the breach reporting, that it was just 3 during this 20 and 21 period. So for 22 and 23, that will all be fine. As I also mentioned, the call center, because of changes we've made in the contract, they have increased their performance, reducing, the breach incidents. So that is very good as well. 1, 3. So 3, as I mentioned, the updating the purchase policies to make sure that everything is reflecting. What was the other one? I'm sorry, number 5 or 6?
Or well, even with the overtime monitoring, these were new findings this year, but do you anticipate the auditors will be?
I mean, we know they'll look at it again, but we are ensuring that all the documentation, it was really just about documentation. It was not that the overtime wasn't pre-approved. It was just that we couldn't locate some of the documentation. Literally, it was for 12 hours for 3 people, I think, going back a few years. So we are working now on this audit to make sure that all the documentation is there. And like I said, on the Navigator one, that's all all set as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Go to Representative Denning, and then we'll go to Senator Lesser, who's on Zoom. Representative Denning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here and for clarifying a lot of these audits. It sounds to me like most of this was internal work that needed to be repaired and done. I share, I'm really grateful that you've done this. I'm assuming the same question that my fellow representative asked was, you've gone back for the past 2 years and made sure that all the documents are there, so we don't have to do this again. Thank you. The last question goes with what Representative Meskers is outreach, and forgive me on my ignorance, but how the cost of healthcare is driven by inappropriate use of the healthcare system, meaning when many of the people who could be on our insurance plan show up at emergency rooms, how are you reaching out to those people who are coming to emergency rooms to address their opportunity at that point? And I know it's a late time to come in and say, I need insurance, but that's where we can meet them and actually try to get them into a plan. Can you just tell me what you do for that? And forgive me for my ignorance on what you do.
No, thank you very much. That's a great question. One of the consumer assistance channels under the ACA is certified application counselors. We have a robust certified application counselor program. I don't know the number of people that we have in the program, but we have quite a few all over the state. They are primarily located, as you mentioned, at the providers, at the hospitals, at the community health centers, in some instances with a local board of health. We wanted to limit it to organizations that would have the same HIPAA training and, privacy and security training for their employees. So when someone does come into the hospital and they are uninsured, they may be eligible for Medicaid, it may be a child eligible for CHIP, or maybe they could enroll in Covered Connecticut or coverage through us. They're certified application counselors through, I think it's primarily the billing offices at the hospital, will work with those consumers and try to enroll them to get them coverage. So that is a channel that's been in place since the beginning to help people get enrolled, when they do come in that instance, seeking care without coverage.
So can you tell me statistically how effective that program is? How many of those people that you're reaching out to are actually signing up?
That I would have to, we could pull data to
Yeah.
see
Okay.
how many people they sign up to CAC.
I'm just curious how
Mhm.
effective it is and how many people follow through.
So one of the challenges we have with this effort, the hospitals, we trained a number of their staff to become enrollment counselors. So somebody shows up, no insurance, they can enroll them through Access Health, whether it be Medicaid, QHP, or CHIP. A lot of time, the person that we train may be somebody that's doing this off the side of their desk. This is not their primary job. So we may train 5 people in a Hartford hospital, as an example. And that's not their permanent job. So when somebody comes in on insurance, they have to find somebody who's able to help them enroll. So that may be a challenge for the hospitals, right? But what we do every year, we go out, we seek CACs, certified application counselors, to certify them to be able to use our system to enroll for as needed. We do in all the hospitals, all of the FQHC, and we go across the entire state. Then I don't want to guess a number, but I think we're in 300 to 400 CACs, maybe higher than that. They are certified by us every year to be able to use our system to enroll both Medicaid, QHP, and CHIP. We'll go back and look at the numbers and see if our system captures the data to give you the information that you just asked for.
Thank you. I would love to have
Right.
that. And again, thank you for your
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. We did talk last time about come back, give you a comprehensive overview of our marketing outreach efforts, so that for both you and Representative Mesker, see what we're doing to give people access to health insurance across the state of Connecticut. So we'll work with the board, with the chair, and then we'll schedule sometime in the fall, perhaps, when we are preparing for the next open enrollment, to come and give you a big picture of what we do every year throughout the year for both marketing as well as the in-person outreach to make sure Connecticut residents have access to health insurance.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And I, sorry, just mentioned that the CAC program is just one of the consumer assistance channels. We have the navigators, as I mentioned. We also, the other point made about brokers, we have between 600 and 700 certified independent brokers that get certified with us. They get licensed by the insurance department, but they get certified with us each year that work on helping consumers enroll in our plans and programs. And then in addition, we have these fairs that go on. So we just have a number of, and we had community organizations that we work with and partner with throughout the year. So we have a number of different outreach channels to really try to reach people, to your point, where they are, so that people are aware of the programs, and try to help them enroll.
One final point on that, we use a lot of data to make our decisions because we have limited resources, so we want to spend them wisely. And a lot of data we use, we get national data that tells us exactly who is uninsured, who's uninsured by zip code. So we target our outreach as well as our marketing by zip code based on the information that we have that tells us, in Hartford, this particular area in Hartford, they have the highest uninsured rate. So we spend more time and resources there. And we do that across the state of Connecticut. And as you might imagine, there are certain pockets, immigrant neighborhoods, low-income communities, but we know exactly based on data from national sources where that we use that data to determine where to spend our marketing and then the outreach dollars. So we get the best bang for our buck.
And we think about that as well when we're selecting navigators. So to James's point, there may be a pocket in certain cities or a population, certain immigrant population, what have you, language, and there may be a navigator organization that has great access to that population. So that would be something we're interested in because that'll help us solve for that, reaching that group of people.
Senator Lesser.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Michelle, for being here today and for your team responding to the audit findings. Just sort of looking at the results around data security and also piggybacking some questions that Representative Meskers asked earlier about the need to do better at improving coverage, expanding access, market penetration is how I keep refer to it. It seems to me that one of the things that Access Health could do better, and I think you've done work on this, is just easing enrollment, especially using either auto enrollment or something along those lines to make it easier for people to get access to the coverage that they're eligible for. One thing we did along those lines last year as part of the state budget was provide a data sharing mechanism with the Department of Revenue Services to make sure that we're getting access to folks who are already eligible for subsidies or for Medicaid coverage are able to get that access when they've completed their tax returns. It's my understanding that that program is not up and running yet. Do you have any kind of update for us about how we can do that, how we can use that to better make sure that access health coverage is available to folks who are eligible, and what we're going to do to make sure that that information is secure?
Thank you, Senator. We are working with the Department of Labor to have it up for, Department of Revenue Services to have it up for the 2024 tax return. They will have to add questions onto the tax return, and we're creating systems to receive that data from them. And then we'll do outreach to people who check the box. We do know from some other states that do this, that sometimes people check the box and actually have coverage through the exchange or already have coverage. People, I guess, check boxes when they're filling out their tax returns. But we want to your point, we want to do everything that we can, to reach as many people. And then so someone that does come to us and we do the outreach, if they are not enrolled, we will open up a special enrollment period for them to enroll at that time, because it would be when they file their tax return, which is probably after the end of our annual open enrollment period. But the goal is obviously to get, as many more people enrolled as possible.
Real target date.
Like I said, it'll be in for the 2024 tax return. The Department of Revenue Services will finalize, I think, early this fall, to be released in January of 2025. And we just have to make sure that we have secure systems in place.
Okay, great. And do you have any specific? Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. I hope I wasn't talking over you. Please proceed if I was.
No, Senator, it's fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I think we'll want to hear about the, making sure that hearing about the security just in light of these audit findings, but also I think that has enormous potential to help reach out to folks who may not realize that they're eligible for free or low cost coverage, but are out there. And I think that would directly respond to Representative Mesker's comments earlier. Another question I had sort of along a similar line is in the recently passed budget implementer, we did reduce Medicaid eligibility for certain Husky A parents. And what the administration told us was that those folks would be eligible for coverage through Access Health, particularly through Covered Connecticut. And I was wondering if there was any kind of outreach or an auto enrollment that you are working on specifically to address that population of folks. Any kind of update along those lines?
Sure. We are working with the Department of Social Services. As you may or may not be aware, most of those people that will be impacted by the change, if they have earned income, they will actually be eligible starting in October when the change goes into place. They'll be eligible for transitional medical assistance for a year, so they'll still have their Medicaid coverage through this other coverage group of transitional medical assistance for a year. And then at that time, a year later, then they would be eligible to enroll in Covered Connecticut. So we will be working. There's only a very small number based on the data in our system of the impacted population that doesn't have earned income that would be eligible right away. But we're going to work very closely with the Department of Social Services on the outreach. And as you're probably aware, Senator, we did implement some automation as far as we could go within the existing broker statutes to help make the process easier for people who become eligible for Covered Connecticut to enroll in those plans. We did make multiple changes to our system as well.
And in terms of, so that what really raises a question in terms, you said that it was within the existing broker statutes. Are there changes that would be helpful to those statutes to either address, populations like the folks who are coming off of the parent coverage, or to the folks you'll be learning about through the tax form checkoff that we could, are there changes to the statutes that would ease enrollment and make it less likely that, future audit reports will ding you for, the documentation around the override, so we could, the more we automate things, it seems like the fewer potential problems we'll have. And so that's why I'm wondering if there are potential changes that we could use to ease, paperwork on your end, but also, make it simpler for folks to find coverage that works for them.
Yeah, so the requirement that you're referring to and that I was referring to is the state of Connecticut has a statute that requires a license for someone to sell or negotiate insurance. So we couldn't, during the unwind, there was interest in us auto enrolling people who were losing Medicaid coverage into either Covered Connecticut or a QHP. The consumer still has to select the plan that they want to be in. Access Health couldn't assign them to a plan. So what we did was we built this, semi-auto enrollment into our system, where upfront in the application, the consumer is asked a question about if you're later determined eligible for Covered Connecticut, would you like to be auto enrolled? And then they're asked to select between one of the 3 silver plans for Covered Connecticut, which would be.
Is that a state law requirement, or is that something that comes down to us from the ACA?
That's a state law in Connecticut.
Well, I'm going to do a sidebar, if I may, and just address my colleagues and say, I understand that Access Health has traditionally, I think, defended that law, but it seems to me that having some sort of default coverage requirement, so that if somebody doesn't opt into a particular plan, that they get something, whether they're randomly assigned or we have some sort of safeguard, would be helpful, because anything that makes it harder for people to get any kind of coverage, the only thing worse than coverage that's not perfect for you is having no coverage. So I think we should, I know that there were some conversations we had with the carriers previously about, coming up with some sort of auto selection system, but I think that that would be a statute that we should think about maybe providing some ease, at least with regards to, plans purchased through Access Health Connecticut. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the.
Great, thank you. If you don't mind, you want to just jump into public questions?
Yes.
Any questions from the public?
First of all, good morning. For the record, I'm Susan Halpin. I'm here on behalf of the Connecticut Association of Health Plans. We represent Aetna, Anthem, Cigna, Connecticut, and United, two of which, Anthem and Connecticut, are active QHPs on the exchange, and happy to be there. First, I want to commend the Insurance Committee for having this forum and for inviting us to be at the table to ask questions. Very much appreciate that inclusion. Also want to thank Access Health for its willingness to come and answer questions to a broader audience than perhaps just the Exchange Board. I think it's really important that information of this nature get out in as broad a way as possible so that people understand all of the intricacies of the exchange, how it operates, how the different sectors come together for the exchange. So I want to say I appreciate that. And lastly, I want to say, for the record, we very much appreciate the state auditors taking a close look at this program. As the report highlights, the primary source of revenue for the exchange is an assessment off the carriers and therefore off the policyholders of about $33.2 million. That's a lot of money if you divide it by the number of folks that are insured through the exchange. So I think it is really incumbent on all of us to take a close look at the program. Is it operating at its maximum efficiency? Are there changes that need to be made? So I just want to commend the audit process and the Insurance Committee for taking a very close look at this. I think we all appreciate it as folks that, pay our policy premiums. I think it has been a very comprehensive conversation this morning. A lot of what I would have raised has already been covered. I did have just a couple of clarifications or questions. In terms of the cyber breaches, is it part of your policy if it happens perhaps with a different vendor, maybe on the enrollment side or elsewhere? Is it your policy to share that breach with the carriers so that they too are watching their systems? Is that something that is done regularly?
We did receive a question from one of the carriers on this, and none of these incidents were HIPAA breaches that required notification
Okay.
to the carriers. It's not in our system, and as I said, it's not involving any ID numbers or anything, on the
Okay.
carrier end. Usually it's primarily a notice or something of that nature.
And if it did, they
If
would
it
be
did,
informed.
obviously, if it
They
did,
would be informed.
yes, of course, we would notify them. Of
Okay,
course.
thank you. I too had questions about the section around eligibility overrides. I think it's been alluded to a couple of times about the attestation requirements for state residency. Is that a Connecticut state specific, or is that's ACA
That's the
requirement?
ACA.
And
Yeah.
when you say ACA, I just want to make sure it's clear for people that may not be as close to the programs as we all are. That also applies to the Covered Connecticut program, because the Covered Connecticut program is a wraparound to an ACA product. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. And in terms of the attestation, I know you talked a lot about what you do on the front end. Is there anything that you do? I know that's annual enrollment, but is there anything that you do kind of on the back end, a year later, if you will, to look at whether somebody actually did move to the state of Connecticut if they indicated that they we're intending to do. Like some of the others around the table, we've heard some fairly significant anecdotal information about individuals enrolling that may not have the intention of moving to the state of Connecticut. So just looking at what we can do collectively to assure that that doesn't happen in the future.
Like I mentioned before, one of the special enrollment periods provided under the ACA is a permanent move to the state of Connecticut. So when a consumer does come in and use that special enrollment period to enroll, we do require verification. The carriers, you know, in the early years requested that we verify special enrollment periods. We are one of the few exchanges probably in the country that does all this extra work. So we do verify the special enrollment period eligibility. So they are required to send commercial mail, if you will, not just a letter you wrote to yourself at the prior address out of state, and then something, you know, at the address in the state, a utility bill, you know, something, what have you, that would show that they have moved to the state of Connecticut.
Thank you. And while I have the microphone, I just wanted to lend our support for a couple of the issues that were raised today that I really wasn't expecting to hear, but was glad to hear. And that would be around, you know, the idea of exploring the direct marketing, how we can, you know, work better together between the plans and the exchange in terms of enrolling more people, and also to echo some of the comments made by Senator Lesser and others around auto enrollment and how we can, you know, work together to work that through. So just wanted to echo those couple of comments, and again, to thank everyone around the table for the invitation to be here. I think that it is really important to have trust and confidence, you know, in the agency, and to have your responses, I think, just builds that trust and confidence for all that are engaged. And again, want to thank you and want to thank the chairs and the members of the insurance committee for convening this roundtable and inviting us to participate. Thank you.
Any other questions from the public?
I have one from the Office of Health Care Strategy.
Sure.
When Access Health does the income verification through the federal IRS verification process and it comes back that someone is not eligible, is it possible to identify those who are eligible for covered CT through that process?
I'm not quite sure what they're asking, but if the person listed an income that was in the threshold, the program threshold for covered CT, they would get enrolled. But if they're, you know, something was different based on the income they listed and what we got from the federal data source, they would be asked to verify that that income was correct.
Okay. It seemed, any other hands up, or we good, Ally? Great. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and we appreciate your time.
Madam Chair.
Senator Lesser.
Thank you. And I know that the legislative part of the is concluded. I just want to say, I know that there's no such thing as a good audit finding by definition. If there are findings, we have to do a better job. And I think that's what we're focused here today on. And I think it's entirely appropriate the committee asks questions and we hear from Access Health about how they can do better. And I think we've done that today. I just think it's important to just remember that this has been one of the best public health success stories of the last decade, is making sure that we provided coverage to so many more folks. And, you know, while we have done some backsliding and our uninsured rate has gone up a little bit, we've made enormous strides since the passage of the ACA and in terms of proving coverage and making sure that we're closing disparities. And I think we should never lose sight of that and give a lot of credit to the friends over at Access Health Connecticut for really doing so much to help expand coverage in our community. We can do better. We should do better. But let's not forget all the good that's been done. And with that, Madam Chair, I just want to thank you for the time.
That was a great comment to end on. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.